Two who have lived their day. It's late in the day in the poem. For me, the biggest giveaway is that it's a back room that they're in, right? It's their rented back room. If it were the front room, then it might be a big picture window looking out over the avenue, right? But in the back room, it's probably a smaller room, a smaller window, shedding less ambient light, you know, on the scene.
I picture them at a kitchen table.
At a kitchen table, that's right, yeah, which is often not, the kitchen is often a room that's not lit by windows at all, right. You know, that passage there in their rented back room is, I think, a masterclass in really, really telling descriptive writing using really simple language. As an English teacher, I'm constantly telling my students, nouns and verbs, you know, things and things happening, that's where it's at. Back off of the modifiers. You don't make it more descriptively rich by piling on prickly and ostentatiously and all of these, you know, adjectives and adverbs. Those are grammatical luxury items. Give yourself a budget and make it a small budget and then just purchase a few. But here we have a noun and then three modifiers before it, and each one is contributing something in its simplicity, in its monosyllabic simplicity. Each one is contributing something essential to the poem. The noun is room, which right away tells us they're in a small space, right? A circumscribed life. Maybe a single room, a little studio or efficiency apartment is all that they can afford. We know that they eat beans mostly, and we don't sense that that's because of just an undying love of beans and a desire to eat them at every meal. We sense that that's an inexpensive form of nutrition that they can get and they're accustomed to now. Room is singular, and then the modifiers are their rented back room. Their rented back room. So it's a back room. It's probably dimly lit. It's probably the least expensive apartment in the building, so it's the one that they could afford. It is rented. They're elderly. They have lived their day. And their place of living, in addition to being small, isn't even a possession of theirs. It is something, in a sense, borrowed. And that reinforces our sense of some of the, in conventional terms, sort of material deprivation from their lives, even though they're also surrounded by, ironically, by kind of material abundance. And then there's...
Can you say something about the poet?
Absolutely, yeah. So Gwendolyn Brooks, as I said, was born in Topeka in 1917. Topeka loves to claim her, and I'm guilty of that myself, as you have seen. But her family moved to Chicago when I think she was maybe 6 weeks old or something like that. So we can't. They were very formative weeks, I'm sure. But she is essentially a Chicago poet. But she had and still has relatives in Topeka, and so she was back in town visiting frequently. If you meet someone in Topeka with the last name Wims, W-I-M-S, that's her mother's family. And in fact, her mother, and very few people know this, taught at the Monroe School prior to Gwendolyn Brooks's birth, and that's the school that's, of course, the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education. So the school most famous in the country for being a segregated school had on its faculty at one point the mother of the first African-American Pulitzer Prize winner. I think that's a great local bit of knowledge. She really wanted to give voice to and present to the reading public Black life, you know, which had been at the margins of literature for all of history, essentially. And she was one of many pioneers. You know, the Harlem Renaissance was well underway, and she was, you know, sort of second wave as far as that development went. But a poem like The Bean Eaters, as quiet as it is, was noisy in its taking a life that may have seemed to the larger culture insignificant and moving it to the center of our attention and dignifying it by giving it the attention that it deserves. And so those are some things to know about Gwendolyn Brooks. She's most famous for a poem called We Real Cool. Do you all know that poem? Yeah. Oh, yeah. We real cool, the pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon.
Oh, it's amazing.
That's a great poem. It's really terrific. It's also kind of a curse to Gwendolyn Brooks because it's her hit single, you know, and so it's the poem that everyone knows her by, and her body of work is so rich and various. But that's a good poem to be famous for. In any case, you know, I'd say just a few more words about the Bean Eaters. You know, as seemingly static as it is, just that accumulation of items at the end of the poem, I think it's one of the loveliest passages in contemporary poetry. You know, as they lean over the beans, there they are together. They're leaning over the beans at a kitchen table. Aren't they leaning toward each other? They are in my mind anyway. As they lean over the beans in their rented back room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls and cloths, tobacco crumbs, vases, and fringes. Each of those seems significant in one way or another. This is a life of, as I said, material deprivation, maybe even poverty, but so many of those things have a kind of a decorative quality to them, or a fanciness to them, that shows that this was not a life without adornment. This was a life with treasured objects in it too, beads and fringes and tobacco crumbs, which suggests that maybe he enjoyed a pipe in the evening in his favorite chair as a way of unwinding from a long and burdensome day, and dolls, which maybe suggests that they had children or grandchildren, or maybe she's hung on to some special dolls from her own childhood. And receipts. Receipts is so poignant to me in a poem about an elderly African-American couple in the 1950s in Chicago. They may have been born slaves. Their parents may have been slaves. They may have come north as part of the Great Migration. And a receipt, what are those receipts for? It's probably for a can opener they bought 25 years ago. Why in the world are they keeping these receipts? Because they're proof of ownership. This is something that belongs to me, thank you very much, in my rented back room in a life that has denied me so much. I didn't get all of that out of that poem the first time that I read it. The first time I read it, it went right by me. You know, okay, I was in college probably, I was reading the poems, like, okay, old couple, they eat beans, got it. That's the poem, I get it. All right, well, why is this even a poem? But I returned to it, or it returned to me, I'm not sure which, but often enough that I had it by heart. And each time that I went back to it, and each time that I go back to it, I discover new things, new nuances, new implications. I learn even more about this couple. From those 12 little lines is an incredibly rich depiction of rich and various human experience, poverty and abundance and heartbreak and delight. They're remembering with twinklings and twinges. Isn't that fantastic? Remembering with twinklings and twinges. The whole spectrum of memory is contained in those two words, the twinklings, which are the first kiss or the birth of your child, and the twinges, which are regret and betrayal and the things that we carry with us at the end of a long life. And the words are so similar, twinkling and twinges, they're almost twin words. They in fact both contain the word twin, but yet they're so different. They're at opposite ends of this spectrum. And yet memory works that way. We may remember something with a twinkling and want to dwell in that memory for a while, but sure enough, that twinkling is connected in memory to a twinge, and we can't stop the memory from going there. That first kiss is connected to a first heartbreak, and if we're going to remember the first kiss, we got to do the whole 90 yards, and the whole 9 yards, and remember the first breakup too, or the first heartbreak. And the poem is accomplishing so much, so efficiently, and it's all just there beneath this seemingly still surface. It's a little miracle of language. And if you were trying to read it the way that you read a Facebook post or a tweet, expecting to get everything out of it instantaneously so that you can then move on to the next thing, you would miss it entirely. So I'd recommend to you all, let me check the time here real quick. I always sort of lose track of it when I start running my mouth. I would recommend to you all being patient with poetry, being okay with the fact that you may dislike many poems that you read, being willing to persist in reading poems so that you might discover one that really means something to you. Not expecting that you'll know immediately that it means something to you or why it means something to you, but if it tickles your imagination in some way, if some line or phrase or image from it strikes you as memorable, return to the poem and read it again, because that's what the poet would like you to do and is inviting you to do, I think. And continue to read it, and maybe eventually, if you've got a lot of it in your head already, commit the remainder of it to memory, and then you won't have to read it again. you can go around saying it to yourself while you're washing dishes or mowing the lawn or taking a shower and discover new things in it each time. I have poems that I didn't really begin to understand until I had committed them to memory and could say them to myself whenever I wanted to. The best poems are, they may only be an inch wide, but they're miles and miles deep. And memorizing them is a great way to always have them with you. And it's also a great way to honor the poem's intention, I think, which is to be a speech act that's also a musical act, if that makes sense. My mentor in graduate school was the poet Robert Pinsky, who was U.S. Poet Laureate for a while, and his big belief, and I share it with him, is that the poem on the page is like sheet music. It's like the musical score that's waiting to be performed. The sheet music isn't the symphony, right? Nobody would say that. Like, no one would read, Beethoven's Fifth and say, I really enjoyed a performance of Beethoven's Fifth there, having just read the sheet music. It is waiting to be a realized work of art. But in Robert Pinsky's view, and in mine, the poem as a fully realized work of art isn't words on a page. It is words on the air. It's a column of air in the body of the person who sang the poem, and that's not necessarily the poet. You don't have to go to a poetry reading and hear Wallace Stevens read his poem in order to experience it, and that's a good thing because you can't anymore. He's been dead since the 1950s, right? So Wallace Stevens' poem, The Emperor of Ice Cream or The Snowman, exists as a realized work of art when you yourself are saying it to yourself or sharing it with someone, but saying it aloud while walking the dog, or while cleaning out the refrigerator, or simply while sitting in your living room with 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, savoring poetry because life is too short not to. That's when The Emperor of Ice Cream works as a poem. That's when it exists as a poem. Why don't I say The Emperor of Ice Cream? I don't get a chance to say that one often enough. It's such an irresistible poem, and I'll never get to the bottom of it. Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear. Let the young men bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let be finale of seam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is, and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. I could say that poem 100,000 times and never really feel that I had gotten to the bottom of it, I don't think. It's a vast and mysterious poem, and I think if you're comfortable with the mystery, if you're at home with it and don't resist it, if you don't grab the poem by the lapels and shake it and say, what do you mean? What's the point? It's a wonderfully liberating thing because it frees you simply to experience the beauty of let be finale of seam in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. That line has my favorite footnote of all time in the Norton Anthology. Concupiscent curds has a little asterisk next to it, and if you go down to the bottom to see what that asterisk corresponds to, it says, literally, lustful milk solids. Which is almost a poem in its own right, isn't it? The other thing that we sometimes, I think, mistakenly do, besides asking a poem to be a page turner, is ask it to get to the point, or ask it to have a point. If you ask the Emperor of Ice Cream to have a paraphrasable point, a point that could be summarized in prose, I think you've missed the poem's point. The poem isn't trying to describe experience for you. The poem is trying to be an experience in and of itself. And you just have to say it, sing it, and dance with it to really experience it, I think. Now, this is not to say that you can't interpret individual lines and find them relevant to your own life and your own experience, but you shouldn't insist on that. As the poet Billy Collins says, you shouldn't tie the poem to a chair and try to torture a confession out of it. Let me conclude with one more poem that I think wonderfully resists interpretation and yet is so undeniably about experience that we all can share and relate to. It's a perfect time of year for this poem, and I think it's my favorite poem ever written by an American, After Apple Picking, by Robert Frost. My long, two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree, toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough. But I am done with apple picking now. Essence of winter sleep is on the night. The scent of apples. I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted, and I let it fall and break, but I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall, for all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. It's a symphony, isn't it? It's an absolute symphony of language. And to ask it to get to the point seems so gratuitous, and to do such a disservice to that feat of language that Robert Frost has pulled off. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. It's straight from lived experience, and yet it's language organized into song, indisputably, I think. It's just absolutely, surpassingly lovely. And let me look at my clock again real quick, because I know I need to. I'll just tell an anecdote really quickly to conclude. Because I don't mean to say that a poem is something that you merely need to allow to wash over you and not think critically about and not ask, well, what could that line mean? I do that constantly with poems. That's a great joy that I take in poetry, is coming up with different interpretations of different lines. And there are many passages from a poem like that we might apply to our own individual experiences. You know, every semester, at the end of the semester, I'm grading papers in advanced composition, and there's a stack this high, and they all look like they, were on the wrong end of a knife because they're bleeding red from all the marks that I've put on them. And I'm trying to spend as much time with each as I can to give the student the guidance that he or she needs to revise productively and to become a better writer. And I'm sitting there thinking, there were 10,000 fruit to touch. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. I think anyone who's ever been in a position of responsibility for many things, all of which are deserving equally of your care and your attention, and you feel that there aren't enough hours in the day for you to give them their due, whether it's children or the kittens and cats at a pet shelter at which you volunteer, or an apple orchard that you're tending, the sense that these things that are dear and precious, and each of which deserve their own moment and my time and my attention, and I can't possibly give it to enough of them. And so now I'm having an anxiety dream about it, in which I'm seeing nothing but apples, magnified apples appearing and disappearing. That's those dreams haunt many of us, I think, and that's relatable. whenever we go out to Oregon to see my wife's family, we often convince my wife's parents to take all 7 grandchildren for the evening. And they range in age from my son, who, as I say, is now a teenager, all the way down to kids who are 1 or 2 years old. So it's quite a spread among the 7. And that is a house full of kids, my friends, seven kids ranging in age from 1 to 14. But we talked the grandparents into taking them so that we, their parents, my wife and her 2 brothers and their spouses and me, can all go out for dinner in Portland and get away from the damn kids, right? This is something that we really look forward to every now and then. And we've got the grandparents, perfect babysitter, they're all set for the evening. Let's go have a fancy dinner, appetizers and drinks and these things that we never have opportunities to most of the time. And so we're there, and invariably it's right around the time the entrees are arriving, you know, just about 8 o'clock in the evening, and then we get the call from Grandma, "Are you all coming home soon?" Completely overwhelmed by this charge, and these 7 grandkids running, the house is on fire, and there are alligators walking through the kitchen and things like that. This has all happened in the space of about an hour and a half. And so we pay early, and we walk out laughing and shaking our heads, and I say to my relatives, "She is overtired of the great harvest she herself desired." These 7 grandchildren, you wanted the grandchildren, you were asking for them when they weren't here, like I remember quite clearly. And now you can't take them for 2 hours? Okay, I see how it is. That poem in instances that are whimsical and serious will return to you again and again and you know, resonate with your life and your experience in different ways. It's always available for that sort of interpretation. But to say that it's a poem about being overwhelmed by an abundance that you yourself had sought, or to say that it's a poem about feeling that you can't properly care for all the things that are in your care, is insufficient. You know, to say that that's the point of the poem, it's so much more than that. It is the entire experience of the poem that needs to be given its due. And I think a great way to do that is to commit it to memory so that you can keep it with you for the rest of your life and continue experiencing it and sharing it with others. It's really been a pleasure sharing some of these ideas and some of these poems with you, and I'd be happy to answer some questions or just have a little conversation of any sort that you're interested in. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is really sparking some thoughts. The way you presented Bean Eaters, for example, kind of evoked a positive, loving relationship, and I'm thinking in a different context, I know a lot of people that have, you know, shared experience and existence together doesn't always mean love.
Right.
You know, people staying together for whatever reason.
Sure.
And really, I mean, the poem, because you pointed out you've got the twinkle and the twinge, so you've got both the extreme possibilities with no implication of which is more